first talk is from Adrian. Adrian will be talking about how to contribute to the IETF and what is the process, how does, from an individual draft to a working draft to RFCs, how this RFC sausage making is done, and how do you can contribute and start the process. So, off to Adrian.
I was wondering about that phrase, sausage making. Does that culturally translate?
Sausages,
Yeah. So this trying to put these slides together, I found I was in a spiral or a loop or something, because the 2 points, how to play your part and how RFCs are made. You need to know one before you know the other, and so I couldn't really work out what to do, which order to do it, and ended up deciding that I would just answer these questions, but probably not in that order. More precisely then, I'll talk a little bit about what the IETF is. Hopefully you know, so it's not going to be a deep dive into all the details of the organisation, but just a context setting for the rest of the talk. Then quite a lot of material on where RFCs come from, how they actually happen, what the process is, and then switch back to how you play your part, how you contribute. So what do you do if you've got a new idea? What you have to do if you want to make an impact in the IETF, if you want to get noticed or you want to get your idea promoted. And then a couple of pages on references and other resources. Although I find myself sitting in this meeting the last 2 days thinking your best reference, your best resource is IETF. Okay, you're here. You want to know what to do, how any of this works. You've got an organisation, you can shout and ask for help, and at the very least, Drew and Nalini will respond, but I'm sure you'll all be helping each other. So, IETF, it exists to make the internet work better, which is a little bit vague, but on the other hand, we all know, we all have a good feeling of what the internet is, both from an engineering sense and as a user, and better is just smoother, more function, more money. It does that by producing specifications of high quality, allegedly. If you want to do stuff that's not related to the internet, do not come to the IETF and expect anyone to do anything other than ignore you. And that's a bit painful, but occasionally we see people come along and say, I've got this great idea for how to make Bluetooth better. Very good, but don't ask the IETF to do it. It used to be the case that we said if you don't mention IP in what you're doing, it's not relevant. We've got a bit broader than that, but nevertheless, you've got to be looking at the big I internet. How does it work? So we have this saying from Dave Clark in 1992, which is long ago: we reject kings, presidents, and voting. So that means we don't particularly look at somebody and say, this is Fred Baker, Fred invented IPv6, and therefore, unless Fred agrees with it, we can't do anything new. We don't respect people because they are our leaders. We have leaders, we have an IETF chair, we have area directors, but they do not get to determine what happens. They have an influence, but they do not have the rule of law. And we don't vote. And that's probably the most strange part of the culture. If we have to make a decision, we do this thing called rough consensus. And it's really hard to describe rough consensus in any way other than to say, you know it when you see it. but it's about having people judge the temperature of their disagreement. If I see something and I say, well, that'll work, it's not how I would have done it, but that'll work, then basically I agree. If I look at something and say, oh my, if you deploy that, you will break the internet, then my level of disagreement is much stronger, and it's up to both sides then to have the discussion and try to resolve in a way that makes everybody less unhappy. So we do that, we judge that rough consensus, usually on the mailing lists, by having email discussions, not voting, not saying I support, I disagree, but saying I've got this issue, can you help me understand whether we need to resolve it or whether it's not a big deal? And in that context, you are well advised to read RFC 7282, which Pete Resnick wrote on humming and rough consensus in the IETF. Humming is one of the ways we judge the mood of a physical meeting. So instead of saying, did you have a nice lunch? Put your hand up if you had a nice lunch. Okay, that's a way of finding out, but that's a vote. What we would do in an IETF meeting is say, all those of you who had a nice lunch, hum now. Okay, I heard that. All of you who did not have a nice lunch, hum now. Okay, I can tell. Lots more people were humming yes than no. I get a feeling of the consensus. So, RFCs. This is the principal output of the IETF. It's how we document our agreements, specifications, our opinions. It's a really historic name, and we got some of this from Fred yesterday. Once upon a time, it was a physical piece of paper mailed out, and it was a record of discussions or ideas, a starting point for further discussion. So it was literally a request for comment. Now we have our discussions on mailing lists, and we publish our basis for those discussions in internet drafts. Once we reach consensus on that material, we promote it to be an RFC. There are currently, I think, about 8,670 something RFCs. And that comes along at approximately 200 a year, maybe 220. You can still comment on RFCs, okay? RFCs are stable in as much as once they're published, they're published. However, they're still requests for comment. If you've got issues, concerns, worries, that's what the mailing lists are for. If you find a hole or some big problem, the RFC gets revised. A new version is published. So this was my substitute sausage machine picture. The standards process in the IETF is complicated, and I'm going to try to describe the golden path. There are all sorts of edge conditions and what ifs, and in a way, it's a protocol. It's a communications protocol that we're running here to produce an RFC, and that means there are error cases, edge conditions, race conditions, all sorts of weird stuff that can happen. But let's just look at where the golden path, what you're trying to do. So although along the way, as I said at the beginning, you need to know how to bring in your ideas and how to participate, you also need to know what the process is. So let's start with that. Ooh, small writing. Internet drafts. You see, I can't even read it. These are transient documents. They're working documents. They're where you publish this is what I've done so far. In particular, they are not supposed to be permanent. They are not supposed to be complete. And indeed, one of the challenges you face when you write your first one is you think, I can't put this out in front of the public for review unless I've done every detail. And that's kind of natural because you're going to get criticism. It's also probably natural because the last time you wrote anything big was maybe at college, where what you submitted had to be the final version and it had to be right because you'd get marked on it. This is really a way of putting a stake in the ground. I've done some work, this is as far as I've got. Anybody wants to help me, come along. And then a little later, I've done some more work, I've got a bit further, and you revise it. Just for technical detail, internet drafts are not published, they are posted. Semantic trivia, but RFCs are published, they are final, they go through a publication process like a journal does. An internet draft, you're just uploading it. It's like a wiki page or something. So there's starting points for discussion. And sometimes they will never become an RFC. Sometimes you don't even intend that they become an RFC. You've just had a complicated idea, you want people to read, you don't want to put it in an email because that's hard to find and people might not read it. So you write a draft, put that out there. Along the way, they may get completely thrown away or rewritten or totally revised and change their color and flavor. That's okay. It's just work in progress. And because of that, they only have a nominal 6-month lifespan. When you post a revision of an internet draft, 6 months later, it goes away. And that's actually good, because it means everybody else can judge how much effort's going into the work. It's a motivation for you to keep working on it. Of course, actually, they stay in the archive because the internet's a wonderful place and everything you do, every step you take is recorded forever, but they still have a date stamp on and that date stamp expires. Because of that, you also refer to internet drafts as work in progress. In other words, this is not a specification. This has not been agreed, it's just work we're doing. And that comes with the caveat that if you implement an internet draft, you're taking a risk. It may be a good risk, you may be getting ahead of the curve, or it may be a bad risk because tomorrow somebody will completely revise the internet draft and your implementation will be left in the wilderness. So what do you do to produce a draft? Well, you pick up your toolbox and you start crafting. There are countless tools you can use and languages you can write in. The most popular ones at the moment are XML and Cramdown. Cramdown being a variety of Markdown. Some people use Word. Word has advantages because it's got change markers in, and so if you're working collaboratively, you can all play with it. Some people manage their Cramdown in GitHub, which has the same properties, as well as having an issue tracker. And NROF used to be very popular. It's much less used now because everybody seems to have moved to XML. On top of that, there are lots of tools and schemas to help you format. So you can take your XML, you can give it to this tool called XML to RFC, and it produces a formatted internet draft out of that XML, which is kind of cool. So what do you have to put in an internet draft? Well, there's a style guide, and the style guide includes a long list of sections you should put in your draft. things like the title, well, obviously. An abstract. An abstract's meant to be about 20 lines. It should be concise, but I think when you're writing a draft, this is your hook. Most people are so busy, they'll only read as far as the abstract. If you don't hook them with the abstract, then you've not done a good enough job. So think of yourself as a salesman trying to sell your internet draft, and that's what you have to write in the abstract. Other things that go in are some boilerplate text. It's automatically put in there by the tools, and you very rarely have to change it, but it makes statements about this is an internet draft. It will expire after 6 months. It says things like the copyright of this draft belongs to the IETF Trust. Keep your hands off it. Then you have a table of contents. Again, that is typically automatically generated for you. And then you get into the meat, the body, what are you actually writing? Introduction, main body of the text, and some mandatory sections about IANA and security, things like that. A neat way to look at this when you're writing your first internet draft is to go and steal somebody else's internet draft. Go find somebody you think has done a good job in the past, find one of their drafts, and that's your template. What did they write in that section? I need to write something like that in my equivalent section. And then come things like references at the bottom, and finally your contact details. So that gives you a kind of template for the structure of the draft, and it's nice because whenever you pick up an internet draft, you can know what to expect in terms of layout. There are also some format issues, and internet drafts and RFCs are all available in ASCII text. And if you're old like me, this is really wonderful because it's page markers and everything. It looks pretty clunky and old. Frankly, when you print it out, it just looks like, what is this? And when you look at it on the screen, it's very last century. It doesn't work particularly well on things like phones because the line wrapping isn't handled. And it's a challenge to do artwork. It's not impossible, but it's a challenge. However, 50 years of RFCs are still readable in this format. And that's kind of interesting. You know, if we'd used a word processor format 50 years ago, there's no way you could read it now. So somebody got something right. And I think that we will continue to publish a text version of everything for the foreseeable future, just for that archival purpose. But the IETF is moving with the times. There are PDF and HTML versions that come out now as well, and if you like, being able to click on cross-references and links and things, and the HTMLized version is quite nice. There's support now for SVG pictures in your drafts. Although I would counsel you to be very cautious. If you're tempted to do a complicated figure using SVG, think about how you will track differences when you revise the figure. Think about whether a complex figure is so complicated that actually you're not describing the problem well. And I've always thought that if you can't draw a picture in 73 characters wide by 56 characters deep using ASCII art, then you're trying to draw a picture that is too complicated and you need to break it up into smaller pieces. We also have support for non-ASCII characters, which has been a great relief to French people who are very sensitive about the accents in their names. and it allows you to do little bits and pieces of pretty formatting as well into the HTML. Right, every time you post a draft, it has a file name. How do you choose what name to give your draft? More time is spent, it's just like coding, more time is spent trying to work out what name to give something than is spent actually putting value in. But what do you have? You have a name with a version number tacked on the end. So you might, for the first time you post a draft, have something like draft Dodi PCE I've got a great idea -00. Okay, so draft your name, working group name, what's it about? Short thing, like you would do, I don't know, if you're writing code, you'd give a file name, so it's that sort of thing. The working group name you use is the one you think it applies to. So often that's really obvious. I'm doing some work in BGP, I'm going to send it to the IDR working group, that's my name. But sometimes you don't know, is this going to go to service function training, or is it going to go to MPLS or Spring? Because I'm doing MPLS segment routing for service function training. Where do I put it? Don't worry, guess, pick one. If you're wrong, you can just publish a new version with a new name and move on. And believe me, if you're wrong, everyone will tell you. At some point along the way, hopefully a working group will say, we really like this idea, we want to adopt it and nurture it as our own child and develop it towards being an RFC. It then gets renamed draft IETF working group name. So you change that name. You can only do that with permission of the working group chairs. But they will tell you when you can, you rename it, and then it's official. Another piece you have to decide up front is, if this was published as an RFC, what type of RFC would it be? And the RFCs end up being classified according to their content and their intent. So we have proposed standards. This is a specification, a protocol specification. It's something that people will implement. And sometimes after a very long time and with complicated process, including sacrificing chickens and all sorts of things, a proposed standard becomes an internet standard. Don't worry about that, basically. Everything you do with a draft is for proposed standard. Then we have informational. This is guidance, this is advice, this is observations, or architecture, or requirements. That all goes in informational documents. Sometimes you'll write an experiment. Maybe a protocol. I've had this great idea for a protocol. I don't think we should implement it and deploy it, but we should prototype it and experiment with it. That's an experimental document. And then we see best common practice, BCP. These have had a checkered history, but nowadays they are mainly used to talk about IETF process. So again, you would typically not be writing one of these as an engineer pushing new technology. That's something boring old people like me do in order to help the IETF function. Historic is for archival. So here's something we did 5 years ago. I think it would be really useful if it was documented, but I'm not asking anyone to implement it. I just want it to be historic. So all the drafts are marked with the intended status of the RFC when it's published. As often as not, we get it wrong the first time we do it. So what? Next time you revise the internet draft, you change the intention. So don't agonize over it. Post the draft, somebody will correct you. This is probably too small to see, but you can look at the slides online, and I've just circled some of the interesting points that come out automatically, like the author's name, the intended status, the file name, and so on. All right, a flowchart. This hopefully is where it gets interesting. So you start at the top left. You have an idea. Maybe you're sitting in the break room with your colleagues and talking about how rubbish some piece of protocol you're implementing is. Wouldn't it be good if? You sit down and you can do one of two things. You can just straight away write the draft. Or you can go to the mailing list and say, I've had this idea. Has anybody else been thinking about this? Gather some opinions. And then put that into a draft. Post the draft. If you don't post it, no one will read it. Once you've posted it, tell people that you posted it. Okay? It's like me writing books. It's no good me writing books unless I actually tell people that I've written them, because they won't sell. So you've got to say, hey mailing list, I've written this draft. Here it is. Typically, because people are busy, you have to say that 4 or 5 times before somebody actually goes, oh yeah, and reads it. And then they'll discuss it, round and round. Eventually, you get to a point where you say, we're pretty happy with this, and the working group likes it. The working group does this thing of taking a consensus poll. Are we all happy? Yes, we are. We'll adopt it. Hooray. And then you publish it, you post it as a working group draft, and then you go around the cycle again and again. Discussing it on the mailing list, revising it, getting it right. Maybe several of you are implementing, and so on. Finally, you think you're stable. You tell the working group chairs, and they do a last call. And we'll come on to that in a bit, but the last call is basically an opportunity for everybody to say, yeah, we're okay, or no, you've missed a bit, or I've just read this for the first time and I've realised it's wrong. And so sometimes that just then bounces back to the working group and goes round again. When you're happy with it, it goes to the area director. The area director is the boss who says, I'm now going to control the process from here onwards. I will commission reviews from the directorate, and that may mean updates. I will issue an IETF last call. That's asking not just the working group, but the whole community. Or whatever it is, 10,000 people that are subscribed. Please read this draft and tell us if it's wrong. That may go back to the mailing list and round, and you may have to update the draft to fix problems. When that's done, it goes to the IESG. The IESG is all of the area directors, so it's like all of the gods have come together and they review your document, and their job is to act as gatekeepers, to spot things that are broken, to spot things that will have negative impact on other pieces of the internet, to spot missing things. And a common one is you've got all this way and you haven't described security properly. And the security area directors will stamp on you and send it back, and you have to fix it. Finally, when the area director is happy that all that's been addressed, they hand it over to a team of copy editors called the RFC Production Center, and they turn your wonderful crafted English into wonderful crafted American, they fix all the spelling errors, and they notice things that you've done wrong, and they produce a prototype of the RFC, and they give you a last chance to say, have they broken anything? Is everything all right? You say yes, and you have an RFC. You get promoted, and you only have to work 3 days a week for the rest of your life. So, I'll try to... These next slides sort of recap some of those points. the individual internet draft. This is where you start. You've had your idea, you write the draft. It can be rough and ready. In fact, I would argue it should be rough and ready. The main thing you need to capture in your first version is why the hell are you doing it? Don't just write a protocol spec. Write a protocol spec that addresses a problem. And your first version needs to say, there is this problem, it needs to be resolved. Discuss it. It's scary, okay? People will criticize you. People might not understand you. It's your baby, it's your brilliant idea, and somebody is telling you it's terrible. Just approach this as all reviews are good reviews. Okay? Anything anybody says, even I didn't understand it, is good information. Because if they didn't understand it, then somebody else will not understand it. So you need to fix that. You need to plant your flag. You need to say, I was here first. This is my idea. If you don't get out there with an internet draft, 6 months later, somebody else will have the same idea and will post an internet draft, and it'll be their baby. As I said, don't assume anyone will notice you've posted a draft. Tell them about it. Tell them on the mailing list. Ask for help. Ask for reviews. Send direct email to people you think might be interested. Grab people in the corridors in your office or in the street outside and say, hey, read my draft. Keep the conversations positive and alive. Somebody's criticized you, so what? Thank them. It's amazing what a difference it makes. Somebody sends you a really harsh review and you send back, thank you, that's really helpful. You have a friend. Keep that discussion on the mailing list where you can, because that helps the chairs understand that there's interest, and then ask to present at a working group meeting. And you can do that, as Drew was saying earlier, you can do that remotely. You don't have to travel all the way to Singapore to present your draft. You can sit in the comfort of your own bathtub and present on WebEx, and just go. Okay, working group adoption. If the working group chairs think your work is in scope for the working group, so don't take your BGP idea to an IGP working group, because they'll say it's out of scope. Go to the right working group. The chairs will say it's in scope. There's enough interest in the work. It must be more than you and your mother who think it's a great idea. It needs to be some other people who will work on it. And the working group's not already too busy. Okay? If a working group is really, really crowded, only the most desperately important new work will be taken in. If they think all those things, they can adopt the draft. And as I said, the file name changes, and at this point, it is no longer your draft. Tough. It belongs to the community. If the community says they want it changed, it will change. And at the absolute worst case, if you refuse to change it at that point, the working group chairs will say, well, somebody else will edit your draft. Okay? You've given it over to the community. How do we distill it? How do we progress it? This is really when the main work starts. Up to this point, it's been your ideas and your work. And once the working group's adopted it, now it's being fixed, it's being tested, it's being really critically examined. So expect to continue the discussion on the mailing list. Expect to have to revise your draft 5, 6, 7 times. Send occasional updates to the working group about what you've done, why you've done it. And keep asking for help. If there's a specific point, a decision that has to be made, something that's complicated, ask. People love solving other people's problems, much more than doing their own work. At some point, you think it's ready, you have to convince the working group chairs. We've done everything that needed to be done. And then you go through this last call process. Experts from various areas live in groups called directorates, and they get commissioned to do reviews. And then, as I said, it goes to IETF last call. IETF last calls are almost always completely silent. In other words, they are full of people not objecting. But occasionally somebody looks at a document and says, I've not looked at this before and I think it's brilliant. Or, I haven't looked at this before and I think it's really bad. And then, as I said, the gatekeepers. The IESG, they see themselves as gatekeepers responsible for technical quality and stability of the internet, and to some extent the IETF brand. So they want to make sure that what is published is good. They look at documents every 2 weeks, so they batch them up and then they review them, and they ballot. So the IETF doesn't vote, they ballot at this level only. And they can say, yes, I support this. No objection, yeah, go ahead, I don't really care. Discuss. I have seen some issues and I would like to discuss them with the authors and see if we can fix them before publication. And then there's a position called abstain, which basically means I've got some issues, I've talked to the authors and I cannot agree, but I accept that there is IETF consensus to move forward, so I'm going to step out of the way. And documents are then progressed to the RFC editor when all the discusses have been cleared, and at least one area director says yes. Okay, the RFC Production Center is a very skilled team because they have to do all the copy editing and the technical stuff. Because otherwise they insert a comma because it looks like better English and they break the technical meaning. So they are really very skillful. They are distributed across America. Most of them work from home, and a few of them turn up to IETF meetings. They do formatting, spelling, grammar, clarity, inconsistency. So this is all standard copy edit work. Don't assume they get everything right. Sometimes they break things accidentally with the best of intentions. You get your chance in a period called Author 48 hours, Author 48, to review what they've done and object. And they're very open to discussions, apart from about a few issues of English usage where they know they're right. It's called Author 48 because it's meant to last for 48 hours and then move on. It very rarely is that quick, and occasionally we've had Author 48 being measured in weeks rather than hours. Okay, so we've just described what is called the IETF stream. Drafts in that stream can also be sponsored by the area director, and that can happen when there's no obvious working group to put it in, or the work is just general to the IETF. And then what happens is you jump straight from an individual ID to IETF last call. And I think we have a picture, yeah. So it's the same picture, but I've grayed out the things that don't happen on this process. So you've had your idea, you've written the internet draft, you've maybe revised it yourself a few times, and you go then straight to an area director and say, I think this belongs in your area, would you sponsor it, please? And they may say, no, take it to that working group. Or they may say, no, I think it's a stupid idea. Or they may sponsor it. And then it goes through the IETF last call and everything as normal. Always remaining an individual draft. All right, so IETF stream, but RFCs can come from other places as well. So everything starts as an internet draft, but it could come from the IRTF, the IAB, or the independent stream. So the IRTF is the research groups of the IETF. Typically it's very forward-looking, speculative, and academic. The process is much the same. You have an individual draft, it gets adopted into a research group, and then it goes, instead of to the IESG, it goes to the IRSG, the Internet Research Steering Group, and then it's processed through without an IETF last call, but with the IESG being given a chance to say, bad idea. You'll see a few drafts come from the IAB. Not a lot to worry about. Usually it gets sent on a mailing list to ask for input, but consensus is not required. The IAB can publish what they want. And then the independent submissions. These are all under the care of the Independent Submissions Editor, which at the moment is me, so I'm famous. It happens when something doesn't really belong properly in the IETF. Maybe it's an experimental protocol that somebody developed. It's relevant to the internet, but it doesn't fit properly in the IETF. Or maybe when there's a difference of opinions, and it can then act as a pressure relief valve. So instead of having a fight with the IESG about whether to publish an RFC, it can come to me and bypass things. It cannot be a standards track specification. Okay? So it is not the product of the IETF, it is not a standard specification, but nevertheless it's published as an RFC. This accounts for roughly 5% of all RFCs published. Right, and changing track. Why? So we've got all of the how do you have a draft, how do you get an RFC, but why are you even bothering to do this? And I tell you, it's not for the money or the fame or the girls. Maybe you're doing it because you want to promote your company name. You want to get your company out there as we are leaders in this technology. Or you've got a company idea, we are implementing this, we want to push it forward. Or your customer has some ideas you want to document and push forward. Or you just think this would be a very good idea for the benefit of the internet. And lastly, and probably the most important reason to participate, is because it is fun. You get to do some hard engineering with a lot of like-minded people, share ideas, solve problems. I would say, before you even pick up your virtual pen to write your first internet draft, understand why you're doing it. If you don't understand why you're doing it, then you'll probably take a wrong direction. English is the official language of the IETF. In the corridors, you'll hear everything being spoken. But on the mailing list, it's English. All the documents are written in English. Meetings are in English. And that's tough for some people. And really tough. And those of us who have English as a native language don't know how lucky we are not to have to do difficult technical work in a foreign language. Right, there are lots of different ways to participate, and I've got a slide on each of these, so we'll just jump straight into that. Many companies are passive in their participation. They monitor the IETF mailing lists, they look at internet drafts and RFCs, and they implement RFCs, and that allows them to build a competitive product until you get it wrong, until your lack of participation means you misunderstand something. But on the whole, you can do this, and companies can save a lot of money, and there are some really big companies in my domain, which is routing, who only operate like this. At most, they send one person to IETF meetings to monitor what's happening, but quite often they don't even show up. Yet they're there and they're big players, so it's possible to do it. But what you're not doing is influencing. So you can join the mailing lists and discuss things. You can read drafts and say, oh, that's interesting, but I don't understand that. Well, I think that's broken. That always needs to be courteous and constructive. Sure, you're thinking, that's a really dumb idea, but you have to phrase it as, that's a really interesting idea. Have you considered what would happen if you actually used it? Ask questions, make suggestions, help advance the discussion, help to build consensus, bring out things that need to be said, and sometimes it's really nice to help people express themselves. So you may see a conversation going on, people are talking like that. You can jump in and say, I think he's saying this. Everything works out. And that makes you really popular and gets you noticed. Next thing, review drafts. Everything needs review. This is how I started in the IETF. I'm a pedant, and I was given a pile of drafts by my company to work on, and I read the first one and I thought, oh, that's not really very good, and I sent a whole pile of tiny little edits to the author, who it turns out was delighted that somebody was reading his document and helping him make it better. And on the whole, people just like that. Do it all the time. Anytime you're sitting with nothing else to do, read a draft. Read a draft at random, if you like, and broaden your knowledge base, and send some comments to the author, preferably on the mailing list. Remember, if you don't understand it, then you're not stupid, the author hasn't explained it. So you can help the author by telling them what you didn't understand and suggesting what they need to tell you. Even better, contribute text. I think you're missing a piece here on management, and I think you need to say something like this paragraph. The authors will love it because you have just made them look good. They will take your text, put it in the document, and everybody will say what a lovely document it is. So you'll often find things that are not clear or are missing. Again, be politeful. Offer your text. Don't demand it. Say, here's a suggestion, not you must use this. Don't expect that when you contribute text, you will automatically be listed as an author. Sometimes you will, sometimes you'll be called a contributor, sometimes you'll be acknowledged, sometimes you'll just be talked about on the mailing list, and occasionally your text will be taken and zoom, nobody mentions you again. That's okay, that's part of the process. You are in the IETF community, you're working as a team. Now, if you write 50 pages for somebody and they take it all and ignore you, you might go, I'm never going to help you again, and also, that's not fair. Next step up the ladder, if you like, is co-authoring drafts. It's the most significant way to make an impact, but there are still very many drafts posted every year, so you have to make your draft stand out. It's like sales and marketing. It really is. You thought you were doing technical work. Well, you've got this idea you want people to listen to. You have to have a good title, a good abstract, a problem people care about. No good writing a perfect draft if nobody cares. It has to be a good solution. It has to be endorsed by film stars. No, endorsed by people who are respected in the community. But that works quite nicely because you want their opinions anyway. If you go to people who are leaders in the technology and they say, no, not a good idea, then at least you've found out. Better to find out today than in 2 years' time. On the other hand, if they like it and they say, yeah, great idea, you're moving forward. And then obviously advertise. Advertise on mailing lists, talk to people. You can help in meetings. So in particular, if you're actually physically there, doing minutes, JavaScribe and things is a good approach. But actually, you can do these things remotely as well. It's perfectly possible to take meeting minutes without being in the room. The meetings are recorded. You can go back later and take the minutes. There's always a shortage of people willing to do these things. If you want to get noticed, volunteer. Let's leave leadership as a stretch goal. You're still talking about writing early internet drafts, but it's worth understanding that these leadership positions exist and they do exert influence and they get you profile. So in my remaining 7 minutes, I did start late, it's not fair. How to get your idea in, all right? So you've got an idea. Is it a small idea? Is it just a delta on an existing protocol? Is it a large change? Is it a new protocol? Is it a whole new thing? Is there an appropriate working group to do it in already? These are things you have to work out before you start. Small idea with an obvious home, write a draft, take it to the mailing list and socialize it. Explain yourself. Not, I've written a draft. I've been looking at the problem of this, and I've been wondering whether it would be interesting to solve it using these techniques, so I wrote a draft. Get people interested. Ask for help. Don't just say there's a draft. What worries you about it? Ask. People get caught in. You quite often find they get distracted from the work they should be doing because here's a new shiny thing and they help you. Contact people you know are or should be interested. You've seen them on the mailing lists. Go and talk to them direct, physically or email. Email is good, but coffee is better. New idea, but you don't know what to do with it? Don't panic. Write the draft. Take a guess. Use a scattergun approach. Maybe it belongs in any of these 5 working groups. I'll send them all a mailing list, an email on the mailing list, and find out who's interested. There are mailing lists across whole areas. So I know this is in routing, but I don't know where. Send it to the routing area mailing list. Ask for help from working group chairs. I've got this idea, I think it goes in your working group. Does it? Or ask the area director, who will have a better idea. Big idea. Write a draft, or probably more than one draft. If your draft is more than 50 pages long, maybe you should have 2 drafts. Make sure you explain what the problem is. How will it make the internet better? Why should people actually read your document? Build a community of support. So there's this thing called an elevator pitch. What would happen if you got into the elevator with a venture capitalist and you've got until you get to the 33rd floor and you've got to pitch your idea in that time. Have that in your head, because if you meet someone in the corridor or over coffee and you can say, I'm working on this, blah, 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 sold. Socialize it. And then we have these things called birds of a feather meetings at IETF gatherings. They focus on new work to work out, do we care? Are people interested? Is this going in the right direction? Should we form a working group to deal with it? All right. You're participating. It's all about how you are seen. Cooperate. We have to get rough consensus. So you've got to cooperate. And so this is hard. In some cultures it's harder than others. You have to work with people who will tell you you are wrong. You have to work with people who will pull your ideas apart. You may have to work with people who are your competitors commercially. But the whole point of writing a standard is that you want to be able to interwork with your competitor. So if you don't talk to them, it's not going to happen. You've got to work with them. It can actually be really good technical fun, because you can, in your own company, you can talk to the two other people in your area who understand what you're doing. Now you've got access to the whole world of people who understand the area. You can meet some really nice, clever people. You do all of this, but don't tell people how to implement. That's your secret sauce. Okay, the IETF feels American, largely because it is, or at least it was. Nowadays, only about 30% of participants are American, and that means 70% are not American. Every IETF meeting, something around 50 countries physically present. Because it values technical excellence, respect has to be earned. A flawed technical argument is called out, and sometimes really brutally. People are busy, people have very bad communication skills. It can seem rude, but hey, if it's broken, it's broken. Get over it, fix it. Earn respect by doing thorough reviews of other people's work, being helpful, and listening when you get reviews of your own work. Okay, you thought it was about the technology. No, it's about the people. Well, okay, technology is important, but to get success, to get this idea of consensus, you have to have the people with you. So always be nice. If you're known as a nasty person, then people are not going to help you with your work. Be helpful to others, they'll be helpful to you, and then build personal relationships. Talk about the work, obviously. Talk about other things. Talk about the lousy flight you had, or the bad internet connectivity you have at home, or about your children. Go and eat food with them, drink coffee, or more interesting things. Ultimately, people are just people. Just because they're in the IETF doesn't make them better people, actually probably makes them worse people, because they are deeply clever technical people who have got there without learning how to talk to other people properly. So they can be really rude, but technically very clever, very knowledgeable, sometimes well-known, scarily well-known. I remember the very first time I spoke in the IDR working group, did my little presentation, and there at the microphone was somebody called Yakov Rector. Okay, invented BGP. And I'm thinking, can I go now? But these people are quite often really insecure, and they have bad communication skills. Remember, they are just humans. Remember, they have a wide range of interests. You'd be surprised. There's an ex-AD I know who translates ancient Greek into English and publishes it, just because that's what he does as well. I know several ex-area directors who are, as a hobby, learning Hebrew. Why not? There are a lot of accomplished musicians. In fact, there's a guitar player who gives a recital every IETF meeting. There are lots of sporting people for all the different sports. There are running groups at the IETF. There's an IETF chair who collects countries that he skis in. That's his hobby. They have families. Often the internet is not their first career. There'll be astrophysicists. There's an anthropologist who chairs the MPLS working group. There's a taxonomist who used to chair the IAB. It's amazing. Me, I write books of fairy stories because everybody should have an obsession. All right, then we have the slide of references. I really strongly encourage you to take a little bit of time out. Don't do it in one big bash, but maybe, take half an hour a week to read the next installment of what's going on, how does it all work. get a feeling for the flavor. In particular, there's a thing called the Tao of the IETF, which is an attempt to explain the whole way we behave and act, which is really peculiar, but to try and put it in layman's terms, and it really is worth reading. And I finished. Drew gives me yeah, well, you were 2 minutes over. So, questions. It's a huge, huge topic, and I don't know, we don't want to do 2 hours of questions, probably.
Adrian, can you also, by the way, this is Drew, can you also speak of what's the most common mistake that you see newcomers making when they first come to IETF, which they can avoid?
Most common mistake. No, I'm going to give you 2. One is assuming that people know them and know what their work is. Okay? Because everybody in their office knows them and knows what their work is. So obviously, if they don't tell people what they're doing, who they are, then they're not known. But the other one is not talking. So I often say to newcomers I mentor, any minute you're not talking when you're at the IETF is a wasted minute. And it doesn't matter who you talk to. They're all clever, they're all interdisciplinary, and anyway, there's such an overlap in our work. So you grab a cup of tea at the break, and you're standing there, and next to you is some other glum-looking person clutching their tea, often clutching their tea and a plate of cookies, trying to work out how to eat the cookies because they can't. You'd be surprised how often you see that. Talk to them. Hi, I'm Adrian, I'm working on PCE, and I've got this problem because I'm trying to work out how to abstract networks. And they say, oh, abstracting networks, that's really interesting because I'm working on DNS and we've got this abstraction problem. Cross-fertilize. If you're not talking, you're wasting time.
Vinay from Microsoft. In the early days when you started participating, what was the most maybe surprising thing about that? Maybe a couple of stories here.
Okay. So my first IETF, Washington DC, right at the height of the boom of MPLS. Went along because I was starting to implement MPLS as a software engineer in the UK. Probably a good idea to find out what's happening, meet some customers. Turned up at this IETF meeting in a room probably half this size, with about 500 people in it. It was crazy. People were sitting on the floor all over the front, people were standing at the back, they were sitting in the corridors. It was very hot in the room, it was terrible. And I sat there with my shirt and tie. Because nobody told me this was a bunch of engineering geeks. I tell you what, at the end of that meeting, so 2 hours later, I was straight back up to my hotel room and changing. But that reading the if the Tao of the IETF had existed at the time, I would have learnt what the dress code was, because it's described in there. What else surprised me? The way that people argue. Same meeting, in fact. Somebody stormed up to the microphone. So we do this thing with lines and microphones, stomp, 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 stomp. I've listened to your presentation and it's just rubbish. It'll never work. It's stupid. Stomp, stomp, stomp. And it's like, what just happened? Meeting continued, other people presented. There was a pause whilst they were changing presenters. Same person, stomp, 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 stomp. I've been thinking about it, I was wrong. That is how engineers should interact.
Someone else, his name was Peter.
No, actually, this was an argument between Eric and Yakov.
Okay, yeah, I've heard those too.
We have our share of those.